Now and forever, we bring IT to life.
Please stand by. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Connect with Remedy webinar series. Today's call is being recorded. At this time, for opening remarks, I'd like to turn the program over to Mr. Greg Keough. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much, Kellyanne. And thanks, everybody, for joining us for our first ever CMDB Best Practices coffee break. This is just a session we wanted to have based on the popularity and the interest in CMDB Best Practices and a slew of questions that came up that we just really wanted to make sure everybody got the right answers and the right context. And so we're lucky to have Doug Mueller, Manish, Patel, and Darius, Wallace to join us to answer some of the questions that you all have. Kellyanne, can you tell everybody how to signal to ask a question?
Yes, if you do have a question during today's program, that will be *1.
Okay, so for anybody that has a question, go ahead and click *1 and we will start our Q&A session.
Okay, and Greg, while we're waiting for questions to queue up, I just want to start with a question that I hear sometimes, which is why, especially because I happen to be fairly adamant about this, why are you so adamant to never write to the production data set? The basic model of how you are successful and what we're seeing customers be successful in CMDB is it's all about the consuming applications, the applications that use the data having accurate, reliable, trackable, monitorable, manageable data. And the best way you can do that is to make sure that you go through a nice, clean, consistent process for loading the data. And that means that you can always track where data came from, what you might have merged together, whether there are multiple copies of the data from different sources, and really to understand that entire provenance and history of your data and be able to track it back and to be able to correct any errors in that provenance. And so by having the rule that you never write to production and you're not allowed to ever update anything directly in production, it forces you to load the data in an orderly way into what we call discovery data set, a data set that allows you to now identify it, allows you to merge from there, and allows you, whenever you see a piece of data in production, that you can go back and look it up. And yes, that means you always are going to have a copy of the data in a discovery data set as well as in production. But that means you don't have to worry about, oh, gee, I made an update and the next automated update is going to overwrite me. No, because the automated update comes into its discovery data set, your manual update comes into its manual update data set, and there's reconciliation to merge that. And if it does do the overwrite, you can just fix the reconciliation rules to say, no, the manual update should win, and re-reconcile. But you don't end up with that confusion of, hold, I lost my data, or my data got stepped on, or any kind of other confusion. So I just wanted to throw that out there as kind of an initial discussion while we're waiting for questions to queue up. That's why it is so important that you never update the production. And by the way, when I say that, one other thing, you never write to a discovery data set, reconcile the production, and delete the discovery data set. Why? That's just a direct update that's done indirectly. You still don't have the record. It just happened to be that you wrote it somewhere else, but then you copied over into production, and then you got rid of the source. So you got rid of that source data. So make sure that you don't do those things, and you'll have cleaner data, more consistent. And I just want to close this answer with one thing. Yes, BMC does it wrong in a couple of places. Before 8.0, we did it wrong with the asset management data set. That was corrected in our 8.0 release of asset management. We still have the service request management product writing SRDs, which are requestable offerings directly to the production data set under some cases. And so those things are being corrected. So yes, VMC has done it wrong. Please don't use us as the best example of doing this right, because we have done it wrong in the past.
The one thing, I just...
So Darius, just a note, you're hard to hear.
Oh, I'm hard to hear. Okay, is this any better?
Much better.
Just to beat that drum for a little bit
lost you, Darius.
Okay, hold on. Okay, is this any better?
A little bit.
All right. After the statement, I'm going to hang up and switch to a landline because apparently the Wi-Fi here, the wireless is not working. So let me keep this brief. The key thing to follow up on this, and this is what this session is all about. Please understand, I am sure some of you out there have some very well-founded or beliefs as to why there is a basis for writing directly to the production data set. I'm sure you do. And the goal would be, this is why we wanted to do this session, please bring them to the table. And what we have found consistently is for almost, if not every situation where a customer has had a justification for writing directly to prod, we've been able to take a step back, evaluate the larger item for what they were trying to do, and found a way or provided the way in order to negate that need. Writing to production is a quick answer or path to something that will hurt you, if not immediately, down the line. That's why we're so animate about this. The number of customers that myself, Manish, and Doug have had to work with where they've started with that approach and either immediately or down the line had integrity issues or things that didn't line up or they couldn't accomplish this or it didn't even show up until later is almost without exception every time we run into this situation. That's why we're so animate about this. So please use this forum or outside this forum that if you're trying to do something, the answer is not right to production. Let's talk about the broader things you're trying to do and then figure out the way to do it so that you don't end up in some of the situations we've run into in the past. All right, so that's why we wanted to come together for this session as well as other things you guys want to talk about. I'm going to go on and switch to a landline now so I can not be yelling out here in the lounge area.
Great. Thank you, Darius. Panelists, I have one question that came in via the Q&A that I'm going to ask you. Janie has a question on, does lifecycle and CMDB auditing tag the username of the person who made a change in the person's sandbox that gets reconciled to the production data set?
Okay, so this is an area we get a lot of comments on, and it's something we're looking at what the best answer is. But the data coming into the sandbox, or to what I don't like the word sandbox because that implies temporary, into the discovery data set, into the data set that you are writing into. Yes, that is correctly tagged with the person's name. Audit records from there are correctly tagged with the person's name or the automated application, whatever it happens to be. Those are all correctly and properly identified as who did it. The one challenge that we hear that is there's some validity to it, that by not writing directly to production, the production data is all last modified by the reconciliation engine, right? And so you can't tell by just looking at the production data who last modified it, and that's correct. You have to actually look at the source data. The source data does have the correct user, the kind of the production data does not. But the challenge we have is that because of reconciliation, the data may actually have come from 5 different sources, different attributes from different places, or just because someone was the last person that updated one of the discovery sources doesn't mean their data won. And the data that's actually in production may be from another data set based on the reconciliation merge rules. And so that's a very difficult problem. But the source data in the sandboxes of the discovery data set, yes, it correctly has who did the work, when they did it, the audit records from there, all are correctly identified as by the person that actually made the update.
Thank you, Doug. I have another question that came in.
Interactive, in case there are interactive questions.
Okay. Are there, Kellyanne, are there any questions in the queue?
We do have a question. Caller, please go ahead.
Now, hi, Wayne Fisher from Brooklyn. I have a question. If there's any exceptions to that, leave the data in the discovery data set rule. I'm doing a bunch of asset loads through the spreadsheet manager, and should that really be cleaned out if I'm having to continue doing those so it doesn't pick up old items when the reconciliation jobs run?
Right. Yeah, that's a fair question. And let me, first of all, I'm going to say, is there any exception to the rule that you keep the data in discovery data set? No. I'm going to say that there is no exception. However, let's now look at your problem, and I want to change the problem a little bit. What you are really doing is obsoleting a discovery data set, if you think about it for a minute. I'm doing a load, like a one-time load to get things going, maybe from a source. And then I'm not going to load from there again, and the data gets obsolete, and I'm moving on to other sources being where the real data is owned. And so I'm going to get rid of a discovery source. Does that make sense a little bit to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I do is, yes, I can obsolete a discovery source. And then in that case, I would get rid of the entire data set or the data in that data set because I'm going to take it out of the reconciliation rules. I'm no longer going to consider that as one of my sources, and I'm going to eliminate that. The one thing you do want to be careful about is that when you do eliminate a data set, you need to check to say, is that the only source for any data? Because if it is the only source for a piece of data, you've got to make the decision to either keep it because it's the only source or get rid of it in production. Otherwise, you have an orphaned and abandoned piece of data in production that has no where I came from. And so there's a whole process you need to do to kind of eliminate a source, but that's really what you're doing in your case. You're not clearing discovered data that is still valid. You're getting rid of that data because it's no longer a valid source.
Okay.
Does that make sense to making that mindset shift?
Yeah, basically I'm just removing stale items from the discovery source.
Yes.
That are no longer useful to me. All right.
Yeah, and again, this to be clear on this, because we actually had this comment come up also, I think, in Engaged session last year, and we were talking about the importance of persisting information and not blowing things away. The kind of emphasis of that was to address, and we didn't state the the examples of where customers were doing this, where what customers were doing is they'd load up an import data set, they'd go in and they'd have everything reconcile and merge into production. Then they would completely wipe out that data set, that import data set, and then the next time a scan would go through, they would reload that data set all over again, right? And so this is what led to a lot of churn, a lot of overload, and collisions and all kinds of things, and also the violations of other stuff. So we were pounding on the idea of persist data. Now, unfortunately, the reading between the lines, which were not intended to be there, people took that to mean I would never take anything out of a data set. I would never move anything from a data set, and that's absolutely not what we're saying. There are cases where certain things ultimately in your environment go away, or there is an end of life for a data set because it's no longer relevant, or the information that's in that data set, in that source, is not your system of record anymore. There are all kinds of reasons why a data set, which is why it's nice to have them partitioned, would go away, or more specifically, CIs in the data set are no longer in your environment, and therefore they go to a flag for delete and ultimately purged out of the system. So our draconian statement of you got to persist all the data and all that great stuff there is there, but it's talking about that other case where people are just blowing away entire data sets as a part of their daily process activities and reloading them again, because there's life cycles that you would get rid of instances of CIs and things like that.
So they're completely getting rid of, like, say they're running ADDM, they're getting rid of all their history out of there, and so they're doing full record updates every time and reconciliation every time they run discovery.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And then they would wonder why. Yeah, exactly. They would wonder why. Well, why does it take so long? Well, number one. Two, why am I getting duplicates? That would be a second situation. And then there's at least 3 or 4 we could call out as to why these would come in place. So when we then go back to them and say, look, you really should be looking at delta loads. Here's the first barrier we run into. They would say, well, we can't do delta loads because the source or the discovery component that we're using, it doesn't have an ability to determine the difference between what it sent us the first time versus the last time. And the answer was, well, you don't need the source to do it. We have that available within AI. As soon as we flip that switch, their loads were orders of magnitude different, because your changes per day are not measured. You're not making millions of changes per day, even though you may have millions of CIs in your data set. You're making a much smaller number of changes per day. And as soon as you start doing that, your flow and the things that go through the system are significantly less. Your overhead is significantly less. And when you start doing configuration management, you're starting to now focus on the changes in your environment as opposed to the daily loads of everything that was just there yesterday and loading it all over again today.
Okay. That sounds good. Can I ask a second question?
Sure.
is there any inborn automation between CMDB and the asset tables outside of Spoon?
Between the CMDB and what?
The asset tables. You guys split in when you went to 8?
So you mean the asset management sandbox, or are you talking about the AST attributes asset characteristics?
The AST attributes.
Okay. So this is always, it's caused a lot of confusion, the shifts we made in 8.0, and the reason for the confusion is actually the error made by originally putting all the asset characteristics into the CMDB. It's not configuration data, it's lifecycle data. And so there's a certain pattern that got used to. So there is a set of interface tables that if you load into them using AI or just regular data loads, whatever you want, it will actually take the data that is the combined data that is both configuration data that goes in the CMDB and asset data, and it will split them. And it will actually put the CMDB data in the CMDB, it'll put the asset data in asset management. There's a set of interface forms that asset management provides that you can use to do that. And then it links them by the instance ID. And so that data load can happen. Whenever you come through the asset management interface, the same thing happens. The data goes in two places. It goes to the AST attributes form for the asset management lifecycle data, and it goes to the CMDB for the CMDB environment. But other than that, the CMDB doesn't know anything about the AST attributes. That's for an application. It's a consuming application that knows that data, and so we don't have that interaction.
Yeah,
there is one bug. I just want to describe one kind of bug or limitation today. The joins between the CMDB tables and the AST attribute table today is joined on the reconciliation ID. And so that means that, hey, you can submit the data, but until something gets reconciliation identified, it can't find the data and put it together. That's actually a flaw in the system. We have corrected that in our 9.0 release. By the way, a 9.0 release that may mystically be coming at some point in the future that doesn't exist today. That we have changed the join criteria to join by the reconciliation ID or the instance ID. Because the instance ID is also there of the initial record that created the data in the AST attributes. And what that means is that, hey, if you enter it via that import into the interface forms or directly into asset management, and now you go back into asset management, you will see the full record now. Whereas up to this 9.0 mythical release, that you would not see the join until the reconciliation ID was created. So we are correcting that flaw in the product, and the join will allow you to see the data that you've just loaded. So that's kind of how it all works. Does that make sense?
Yep. Do you guys have any documentation for that process?
Do we have any, oh, you mean that interface form and things?
Yeah.
I'm assuming there is, but I have no idea where it is. Let's just make a note that we need to go find that and maybe post that as a follow-up to this call.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, Greg?
Any other questions, live questions on the line?
We do have another question. Caller, please go ahead.
My question has to do with SCCM and data source stuff. We're having an issue currently. We remove software from a computer. SCCM sees that software is not there anymore, but it doesn't remove it from anywhere in Remedy. How do we make it do that?
So SCCM, it goes away from the SCCM source, but it's not disappearing from Remedy?
Correct.
And how are you loading the data from SCCM? Are you using AI?
I believe they are.
Okay. So if you take a look at the features of Atrium Integrator, there is a feature that allows you to find missing data. And so it's not something you run daily. It's something you might run weekly or monthly or something. And it is a feature that when you run in that mode, I can't remember what it's called. Maybe Manish, I'm going to ask you to tell me what it's called in a minute. Because, by the way, Manish is the one that does all this work daily. Darius and I just talk about it. Manish actually knows the real answer. So whenever he says something, you know it's true.
Exactly.
There's a feature that when you turn it on, what it does is Atrium Integrator first reads the data set. It reads all the records in the data set. And then you do the load. And then what it'll do is it'll mark every item. Hey, I found it. And then everything that it doesn't find, it'll actually mark as deleted.
So what you're saying is if Monday in Remedy, in the SCCM data set and in my production data set, it says that my machine has Adobe. I remove Adobe the next week, because we only bring the SCCM data in once a week. SCCM says I don't have Adobe anymore, I mean, because it's not there, then this thing that I can turn on in AI would remove that relationship.
That's
Well,
right.
no, actually, let's not say it removes it. Let's say it marks it as deleted.
Okay. And then how do I get it removed?
Okay, then you would follow up on your purge process.
Job to delete it.
Yeah.
So let's describe this for a minute. So what our best practice is because maybe it couldn't find a machine because it was turned off because someone was on vacation for a week. And we think that the best practice is not to immediately remove it. There's an attribute on both relationships and CIs called mark as deleted.
Right.
And what would happen in this process is that flag would be turned on. So a mark as deleted would be set to true. When something is marked as deleted, when you're just querying the data, it will not show up.
Okay.
You have to actually set a special flag to say, also include the mark as deleted data. And so our recommended practice is to leave it marked as deleted for some period of time because it may come back. And then you want to keep it with the same reconciliation ID, so all the links to asset management and change management, incident management are all there. And then after it's been marked as deleted for some period of time, I like actually a fairly long period of time, 6 months to a year, but it could be whatever period you decide. A reconciliation job can run to say, hey, everything that's been marked as deleted for over this amount of time, please actually physically delete it.
Yeah, and unless you have, that's the general best practice for those for which you don't have your scenario that you described where SCCM is your system of record and trusted, so it's trying to do it in an immediate fashion. What we're promoting here is that let's not confuse the fact that it couldn't be found with
Correct.
the fact that it didn't come through. Now, if you have a supporting process that says, hey, when the thing goes to a marked as deleted, I have a process that is one, the process says, this is the reason this is not there anymore is because I engaged a process for it to be gone, and therefore you're now following up on acting upon the fact that I know it's gone because I was the catalyst for it disappearing. Then you may act upon that right away because you were the catalyst for it, and you just have to be able to identify those. The other one could be that, hey, SCCM is the system of record. When it says it's gone, I know for a fact, and I'm going to put all truth in the fact that it's gone, and it's not a matter of it's coming back. I actually want that to be reflected, and you can take a more immediate action in your process. But you got to do that in a very targeted way, and the general rule is allow time because you do not want to confuse it with the fact that just because the discovery source didn't report on it doesn't mean that that it's gone. It could just be like Doug said. It couldn't get to that system that day on that scan. It could mean that that system was not up or something was dropped and it just missed it on that run. And
Correct.
so in the next run it'll show up again. And you don't want things flip-flopping on you like that. If you
Right.
Don't
want the main CI record to go away.
Right.
Because for just that reason. But the relationship to the software,
right.
We need it to go away in an automated way on a real reliable basis because otherwise it totally throws off our software license counts.
And the mark as deleted would make that happen because the mark as deleted would mean it doesn't show up in your software search, but then if it came back, it wouldn't.
Well, but if we loaded the software again 6 months from now, it would get added back again.
Exactly.
I would assume.
Yes.
Which is what we would want it to do. So what is this that I need to tell my Remedy team to turn on in AI?
Yeah. So Manish.
Yeah. So in this case, so what you can do is that there is an out-of-box sample job we have, which will help you to put this whole thing in place. Where I'll have to kind of find out exactly what the name of the sample job is. But if you go to, there is a one in a HM integrator, the repository, you would find that name with the sample. That's where you will find one of the jobs as a delete. You will see the name of the job it's with some delete. I'll have to put that information as a part of Q&A. I'll keep that in mind and have more detail on it.
Yeah, because my Remedy team, my Remedy guys are telling me they have no way to make this stuff go away if SCCM doesn't see it anymore for this software, and it's causing us major, major issues.
We can show you how to do that. And so what I would encourage you to do is twofold. Number one, we're going to post the sample job. Number two, have your team go to the AI documentation. That documentation is all available online. And if you go to the Atrium Integrator documentation and take a look, and there should be a discussion of the feature because it's a standard feature of HM Integrator, about how to, find deleted data, essentially. If you take a look at that, you should find a complete kind of set of documentation on that topic. And then we'll post the sample jobs and a pointer to that documentation as the kind of response to this call.
Cool. You will make me the queen of my office.
That's our goal. That's absolutely our goal.
Cool. Thank you. All right. One more question. When you're talking about only updating stuff never updating things in production, are you talking about I go and take a computer off and I put it in inventory, not changing the status in my production data set?
Correct.
So you want all my technicians to have access to the STCM data set, for example, which is where our laptops and desktops are, and only once a week that data is going to get updated?
No. Okay, so number one, they're not allowed to update production. Number two, they are not SCCM, so they're not allowed to update the SCCM data set.
Correct.
What you would have is, so for example, if you followed Darius's process and you said, hey, I know my process and I know it's really gone, you would have a manual edit data set, yet another data set, that's the one they're going to edit in. And they're going to make their changes in that data set, and then you're going to have reconciliation. They have same reconciliation ID, and reconciliation merge is just going to say that data set wins for attributes like, hey, what the status is or whatever it happens to be. The idea here is don't confuse different sources. You have a person saying, I'm taking this offline, or I'm moving this to inventory. And so SCCM would have it not being found anymore.
Correct.
Right? And so that's going to come up as mark as deleted, if you will. But you know it's not really deleted because I'm putting it back into inventory. So what you would do is you would say, hey, I've got an inventory data set where I put this object in, and I'm going to say the mark as deleted flag wins from the inventory data set, not from SCCM, because SCCM thinks it's gone, but you know it's not.
Correct. And I manage that by looking at, before I run purges, looking at what's marked for delete in each of my data sets.
And that's why you have that manual inventory. But the problem would be if you did that to production,
exactly,
and you change the status.
Yep.
The problem is SCCM at the end of the week is going to find, hey, it's gone. And when the merge job happens, it's going to overwrite your change. You see what the problem is?
Right. Well, and that's why one of the only thing I delete out of my production data set is duplicates. And if I find a duplicate that's in my SCCM data set, I delete it from there all at the same time so it doesn't put it back in my production.
Yeah, that's the cleanup. But in this, the best way to do it would be that when something's moved to inventory, that's an activity you do. And so you move it to activity by putting that, make a copy of that CI in that inventory data set, if you will. And that's your inventory, and you know what's in inventory. When you take something out of inventory, you take it out of the inventory data set, and you reconcile things from there so that you know, hey, these are the things I'm managing that are in inventory. That the only discovery tool that can find inventory is a person.
Right.
And just to add to, you touched on a very, very important subtlety that I want to make sure we call out. Again, our emphasis around not messing around with the production data set. That's the general rule. That's the mantra. Anything coming up, you should turn people away every single time they want to talk about writing directly to the production data set. Now, is there an exception to that? Is there cases where there are things that come into play? And that's why Doug called out. There's a difference between the fact that, okay, I didn't do this initially, and I have to clean up my production data set. Okay, that's a cleanup operation. You got to go in there and do that, and do what you have to do to get the stuff out of there. What we're emphasizing is a part of your day-to-day, steady-state process operations. You are not doing things in that area. We're not doing it even for the initial load, even though some people would say, "Oh, it's just one shot." No, you don't do it then. But if you find something that's an exception there because you got a duplicate in there, you did the exact right thing. Not only did you get it out of the production, but you actually went back to the source so that you know that it doesn't show back up again, because it's a cleanup operation that is an exception for that case. In a perfect world, what you should be able to do, and I think Doug stated this before when I was transitioning phones, was in a perfect world, you should be able to blow away your production data set, rerun your recon rules, and everything gets regenerated as you need to. And the real power of that is, I will guarantee you, I will assure you that you will not get your recon rules right the first time. And in fact, they will evolve over time. And if they evolve, how do you go back now and say, okay, reapply the rules to get the data cleaned up the way I need to? Well, a nice way to do that is say, the production data set is a black box for writing other than the recon activity. You theoretically could wipe out your production data set, not have a panic attack, rerun the recon activity and the merge operation, rebuild your production database data set, and you're good to go.
But then if you did that, then you're losing historical stuff like incidents that are associated with the CIs and change tickets and that kind of stuff, correct?
You're not, because the data set doesn't contain incidents and things. They're tied by reconciliation ID. The reconciliation ID is the same in the discovery data set and production.
Okay. So what you're
tied by the instance ID. They're tied by the reconciliation ID.
Okay.
So when it got recon, so just to clarify that, because you raise a very good point. When you come into the item, the CI, just say a CI, it started with a simple model. CI comes in, all it's known in its world when it's introduced to that import data set is it has an instance ID.
Right.
It doesn't have its global reference relative to anybody else. So it's basically, coming in as a newbie. Now, once it gets introduced to the community and you have the recon coming in, it says, oh, there's other people that add value to enriches who I am, and then ultimately I end up in the production data set as a fully formed, fully enriched CI. I am better than what I was, because when I started with one thing, I went to other people and they enriched the depth of what makes me a CI. Now, at that point, I get a recon ID. That recon ID says that in the reference back in the source data set and any other data set that reference to that item, it gets that recon ID. So now I have that global unified identifier that is with me as that item. So blowing away the production data set, when I go back in and redo this item, the recon ID is there and theoretically should be represented back into the golden master, the production data set.
So is that, if I'm understanding correctly, I have a server, okay, that is being discovered by Atom. The record was put into my Atom data set, goes into my pre-production data set, goes into my production data set. Okay? And what goes in there initially is just the data that is discoverable. You can't discover asset tag, you can't discover location, you can't discover organization, and all kinds of other stuff. Right. That and you're not going to see the change ticket necessarily, because I'm going to reboot that server. Should that data that is then represented in that production data set get pushed back to ADDM, so they're a mirror of each other in both directions?
No, the ADDM data set's only going to be the data from ADDM. But what happens is it's got an instance ID, which is a unique instance. It's the ADDM instance that's been loaded. When you run through the reconciliation process, the reconciliation identity, it will get a global tag called a reconciliation ID, which is a global name.
Right.
And when that copy is made into your other data set, the same global ID, reconciliation ID, will be carried along. And so the production data is the only thing the change process is worried about. It's the master resolved copy.
Right.
The copy that's in ADDM is what ADDM thought.
Right.
Okay? And no, they're not the same. They may be, but they often are not. There's often some kind of differences between them, and that's fine. But the idea is everything is tied by that global reconciliation ID, and that ID is held. So even if you did delete production, you don't have to. I mean, again, you can just mark all the items that need to be re-reconciled and just reconcile on top of the existing production stuff. But it's a theory that you could do that. And it's true. You should be able to do that. But the key is nothing is lost because everything is tied by that reconciliation ID.
And that reconciliation ID ties back to my change tickets?
That is what's on your change ticket. The identifier on your change ticket or incident is the reconciliation ID, not the instance ID.
Okay. So when I'm looking at my change ticket and I'm looking at that relationships tab and I see the name of my CI in the back end, it's associating that with the reconciliation ID.
Exactly.
That is correct.
So I could theoretically, if I wanted to, repopulate except with the non-discoverable data like location and asset tag, if I needed to blow away my production data set.
Right. Again, emphasizing this is a concept.
Right. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not going to.
I'm not telling everybody to get off the phone and blow away production.
No. I'm not going to let anybody blow away my production data set. No.
Let me qualify one thing. You said except for that non-discoverable. No, that's not, even that's preserved because that non-discoverable has a person discovering it, and it's going to go into a manual discovery data set. Somebody's going to type that into a data set, so it's also preserved. The source of that data is people. And so somebody's typing it into that data set rather than an automated source like ADDM, but it's yet another discovery source. People are the discovery source for that data set. And then you merge those two data sets to provide production. So again, even that data is preserved.
Is that the sandbox stuff that I see for every technician that updates CI records?
Well, the sandbox is, okay, so we're going to take another aside here. And we have to admit another flaw. Okay, so the sandbox is what you see for each technician is because people are updating things through Atrium Explorer. And the practice historically has been, hey, when you're editing that, you create a sandbox. That's temporary data. When you're done with it, you say promote. That promotes to production. The problem with that is that's an indirect, direct update to production. And that's a bad practice. And yes, our product defaults this way, and we're correcting that. We actually have introduced fixes in both the 764 SP5 line and the 8.1 SP2 line. We've put fixes in the reconciliation engine. And so the better practice is for you to be on one of those patches and to fix the recon jobs, because what should happen is the following. You should create a permanent data set that is called my Atrium Explorer Permanent Manual Edit Data Set. And by the way, make it an overlay data set, because that way you can have relationships between endpoints that you don't create, right? And that should be an overlay data set that's permanent. And then those sandboxes created by Atrium Explorer are just fine. They're temporary sandboxes. But when they promote, when you say promote, it should not promote to the production data set. It should promote to the Atrium Explorer Permanent Overlay data set. And then that data set should reconcile to production. Now you have, what you're doing when you're making those manual edits is you're updating, you're acting as a discoverer and updating a discovery source, the Atrium Explorer Permanent Discovery data set. And then that is then the permanent repository of manual edits. And then that gets reconciled into production by reconciling with ADDM, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Okay, so what you're telling me is that the way we're doing it now, where they go into the asset management console, open a CI record, and change the status, they shouldn't be doing that.
Okay. You're going into the asset management. What version of asset management are you using?
We're in 8.1.
8.1. So 8.1, you're actually covered, because in 8.0 and later, the asset management manual data set is a permanent data set.
Cool. Okay, so we're doing it the proper way.
They're being preserved permanently, and that data set's reconciling with production. So you're actually okay. Those manual edits are all being preserved and are all being reconciled.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So we're doing stuff the way we need to. We just need to figure out how to make the stuff go away that's no longer available, even though my Remedy team says that it's not doable.
Right. And there was a question about what about 764. Yes, 764 did not do that. There is actually a configuration setting. I don't happen to know what it happens to be. There is a configuration setting that you can actually say that the data set's going to be permanent, and then you just have to make sure that you take the purge step in the reconciliation job that reconciles the asset management data set to production. There is a step that does a purge. Disable that step in the reconciliation job, and then the data stays permanent in 764 also in the asset data set, and that is the best practice.
So let's flush this out in the documentation, because I think Manish is nodding his head because, of course, he agrees with everything we're saying, and we're just letting you guys know he's nodding his head. But let's take those two items. We're gonna reference the documentation as an output from this. We'll post that for others to have those specific references.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing. Let's open the floor up. Thanks again for those were some great questions that I'm sure a lot of people had in their queue.
Yeah, I know there's some concern that, hey, we've only handled a couple questions, but in the couple questions have been many, many, many critical topics. It's just not the point question.
Right.
But Greg, we're ready for the next one.
Yep.
Kellyanne, the next caller, please?
All right, caller, please go ahead.
Someone's shy. As you found, we don't bite.
Right.
If you heard the voice prompt, your line is open to ask your question.
This is Rich Hamilton. I believe my line's open.
Yes.
Go.
And my question was answered during that long conversation we just had. Perfect.
See, I told you. See, multiple questions were answered by one conversation. Terrific. Thank you for confirming that.
Yeah.
So wait for the next one.
And we'll take our next question. Caller, go ahead.
Hi, and a follow-up question on the ASC attribute form. If you do actually have a discovery set that is capable of populating some of that information, even though it may be asset-related rather than CI-related,
Yep.
What is the approach that you guys are recommending?
Okay, there's two different ways you can do it. Number one, you can actually have the load job load to the asset management interface forms instead of loading directly to the CMDB. And what it will do is it will actually split the data and go into the CMDB on one side and the ASC attributes on the other. So that's one option. The other option is to actually have a kind of a dual load. You actually, you load the CMDB config data to the CMDB form, and you load the asset data to the ASC attribute forms, and you have two AI jobs.
Okay. So it would require the use of AI irregardless. There's no way you're not recommending workflow that in certain situations it updates AST attributes. If AI is not already involved, it needs to be.
AI is a recommended load strategy. You can actually use anything. It's just an API, right? You can use the API program. But essentially, if you're talking about the workflow, that's what the interface forms of asset management do. You load the data that's both config and AST attributes, and workflow pushes it to the two places.
Correct. But if you've got a pre-existing interface prior to 8 that populates, let's say, computer system and information that's now in the AST attributes forms there,
yep,
they've got to revise that to not be a straight push through recon. It's got to actually use AI or some other workflow to address that.
Okay, that would be true, and we have had a couple of customers that say, I've got these great big jobs, I can't fix them. So as a less than desired, the best way is to redo your loaders, right? Okay, but if the answer is we do have a couple of customers doing this. If you need to say, I can't do that in time and I can't make that happen. So one of the strategies you could use is to add the attributes to say, for example, it's just for computer systems. You can add the extra attributes to computer system that match the attributes that used to be there. Not have them being used by the CMDB. They're there, but you don't show them as part of the CMDB. And put a piece of workflow that says, hey, whenever a new record or an update comes in, I'm going to always push these fields over to AST attributes.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So you can do that as the interim strategy until you can fix your loaders. And for some people, that's a much faster path. That, hey, okay, I'm going to still load it there, but I'm going to immediately push it over to AST attributes so that all the rest of the processes work right. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Next.
And we'll take our next question. Caller, go ahead.
Yes, hi. My question is regarding ADDM and, all this talk regarding markers delete. I asked Manish a question online, and I'd like to bring it to the general panel. Right now we have an issue where we wait with ADDM to not see a CI for 4 scans, and then after that we mark it as delete and it's merged into the asset data set. I was quite excited when I heard earlier in the call that you were talking about using the mark as delete flag and then not seeing it in the SQL. The problem that we're having is that we're seeing both CIs, a new CI, a repurposed CI, if the virtual is rebuilt, and we'd like to not wait for 4 weeks. So is there a way that we can tell when something was set as mark as delete? I guess is the question.
Well, mark as delete is just an attribute. So when that attribute is changed, you can always have workflow that reacts to it immediately. Because you got to remember, the CMDB is built on the action request system, so you have full access to filters and all the other capabilities of the action request system. So if there was something in your process that you need to say, the second something was, for this data set, whenever this class of thing was marked as deleted, immediately do something. You could always put a filter in place that reacted to that. Is that?
Yeah, that's not the question. No, not at all.
Okay.
What I'd like to do is, in fact, Doug, I think that's you talking. I think you say that someone said, we'd like to leave it as mark as delete for a while and yada, yada, yada. Well, after a while, after 3 months or 6 months, I'd like to then remove it. What is the identification criteria or the qualification on the purge qualification that I put in place to then recognize that, because if there's not an attribute on the CI that says, hey, this is when it was set to MAD, then we don't know. So I'm looking for a little bit of an idea.
There is the attribute, and there's the date time criteria that you just called out. That's what gets included in the qualifier.
The key
So I asked online if there was a mark as delete date and timestamp on the CI, and you tell me there is? That's the answer.
No, there's not. But what happens is when its mark is deleted from a given discovery source, it's not going to be updated again. So the last modified date actually is correct.
So the normalization or other jobs that run won't update that record. You sure?
That is correct, because when it gets marked as deleted, it gets the has it been normalized, has it been reconciled flags are cleared, right? And so yes, it will be normalized and reconciled within the day of the time it was updated. But now those flags are set done, reconciliation will not touch that record again. Normalization will not touch that record again because they've already been done.
Yeah.
Okay. And so your last modified date is actually a safe date. And that's, again, why you don't keep reloading it when it hasn't had any changes, right? Because then the last modified date keeps getting updated.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so, yeah, the general criteria people use, and by the way, this works for many, many, many customers, and so we know that, hey, once it's marked as deleted, you don't tend to update it anymore. It doesn't show up in interactive cases, so nobody's manually updating it, and the discovery source is the only one updating it. It already knows it's deleted, so it's not reloading it. Is you use if mark is deleted and the last modified date is greater than whatever.
Great, okay. Thanks.
Cool.
Next.
Again, that is *1 for any further questions.
While we're waiting for that, Greg, do you have any?
Window, Greg?
Yeah.
We're interesting.
All of them are interesting, Doug. let me find one that would be good. This one I'll just ask, and you can criticize me later. This one's from Mitchell. What is the best practices on checking for normalization or recon errors? I know right now you have to go directly to the server backend and look in the log directory, which these logs don't give the best info. Is there a best practice for this process?
Well, if you want to know things that failed, of course, there's a reconciliation status and a normalization status attribute. So you can actually look at that attribute to find things that have failed, right? Hey, because it'll say normalization error versus normalized versus needing to be normalized. And so you'll be able to see that something is done. But then if you want to see the details right now, yeah, it's kind of a pain. You have to go look at the log. There's a lot of discussion going on about that. So how do we make this better? Right. And there is work that is in being thought about and how to make that better. Today, the best is to look at the status of the item. The status will tell you whether it's been a problem or not, and then you do have to go to the log. Manish, is there anything else I can do?
So let me just throw something in real quick, because if you guys recall, the three of us were on this discussion before, either in an email thread or interactively. This fits into that bucket that was at one point we were looking at the idea of dealing with situations where, yes, drilling down is that interactive portion, but it was the jobs run overnight. And what people were looking for and what we were trying to identify is the fact that when those jobs fail, I don't want to wait until the morning when I come in to find out that the job has failed and I've lost 5 hours or 7 hours before I would know that I come in and have to do something about that, and trying to put things in place that allow there to be more of a proactive ability to understand, one, not only when jobs failed, but when there were failures, to be able to have some governance or some element above that would kind of, I don't want to say monitor, but be able to act upon those events so that I can be more proactive when those things occur at the time that they occur. And we talked about this last year, and as you said, Doug, I think there was some ongoing threads about what that layer, because it's not just a simple, put a Band-Aid in these one cases. We want to look at it in a more comprehensive fashion. So there have been some thoughts there. It's just a matter of how we fold that into a more general solution that addresses that need.
So just to confirm the question, you are not crazy. It's harder than it should be.
Right.
We're working on it.
Right. And I'm sorry, I cut Manish off when the question was posed. So Manish, is there something beyond that you had in mind that I may have overlooked?
No, not at all, Darius. Yeah, you covered pretty much everything. I just wanted to, I was just kind of looking the Q&A session and some other question came up that I wanted to bring it up. But yeah, you can finish it up first and then I'll talk about it.
Okay, consider it finished. Your turn now.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So one question I'm just looking in a Q&A, it's from Chris. It's asking, I mean, he's asking about the best practice with regards to preventing orphan child CIs. And I've seen this a question a lot, even on our community, where there is definitely a concern about how to delay. I mean, how to manage the orphan CIs. When we say orphan CIs, we always talk about the weak reference with a strong reference. For example, computer system is connected with a monitor or any CI which is not discoverable. I mean, it is discoverable, but not easy to identify. So we go and identify such a CI as in reference to the parent, which is computer system. That's what we do. And that's how we consider this CI as a weak. If my computer system is not there, such CI is like a processor or memory card, and all those CIs will also be gone from the system. So when we are deleting the CIs, typically such CIs are connected as a weak reference or weak relationship, we say, like a hosted system component or hosted access point, such relationships which are weak. And any parent CI gets deleted, your child CI should also be deleted. So your CIs will be, the whole data integrity will be intact. And when you do this, when you go through the reconciliation process, all these CIs will be also updated in your BMC asset to reflect the right info. So that's how you really take care. But if you are seeing any kind of problem in this mechanism or anything, we can definitely talk later. You can reach out to BMC support and we kind of have more conversation about it. Doug or Darius, you want to add anything here?
Manish, isn't this also tied to the characteristic of a relationship? When you define a relationship class, there's a characteristic called cascade delete, that if that characteristic is set when you delete the parent, it actually takes out the child?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's one of the ways that one of the option I would say that we also have it documented to take care about the orphan CIs. But we also have, I mean, this option was available even from a long time back. We also do have this as a part of the product where any weak, strong object is deleted. You will go and take care about the child CI as well. So it will go and delete the child CI too. Again, mark as deleted. When I say deleted, I'm talking about mark as deleted, not the physical delete.
So one thing I want to lose sight of is that so Manish, okay, so I think what happens sometimes is that customers find these orphans and they wonder, how did I get the orphan? How did this thing result in an orphan? So what I would want to offer is can you take a step back and say and look at what is it that people are doing in the configuration and the relationships that are resulting in orphans, because some people are seeing the results and not sure what they did in order for that result to be there. And then there's the cleanup process, don't get me wrong, and we can tell them how to do it going in. But what have you seen as what people have done that actually results in orphans so that people can go back and look for those circumstances and rectify them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Darius, for pointing this out, because this is really important to point out as a part of this question. What I have seen working with the different customers when we are loading this data through either through third-party integration or through any tool, what happens is they don't wait for a relationship to build between two CIs. For example, computer system and monitor, or computer system and your card, or such weak objects. So what happens is they don't wait for it, and this CI is in a working data set or source data set within CMDB. They are there independently. Now, when you go through reconciliation engine process, it also kind of puts some identification rule, and we'll go and identify CI. But if CIs independently exist, it will go and identify those CIs into BMC asset. So this is the area which is really critical, and I would say very important to look at it. That not to bring such a CI into BMC asset, there is one option that we add as a part of the feature, which can help you to kind of filter out such record from your identification process itself, which will say, okay, exclude all orphan child CIs. What it will do is, if this object or this CI has been considered as a weak object, but if it is not connected to a parent, then don't bring it. Because I wanted to have it connected, then and then it makes sense or will add a value for my consuming application. So this is the critical point. I mean, as a part of the identification, before that, make sure your CIs are connected with the parent, and then you bring it in. Otherwise, don't bring those CIs right away.
Exactly. Yep. So this is one of the ones that now you can go back and look at your current rules, your current setup, and put an action in place. Some of you may not be seeing this, but now that you're aware of it, the thing that Manish called out is so important, because it then ensures that when you put the items in place, you now have both of them there with the relationship, and you don't have the situation where you have this gap between the cycle and an item is there and it's sitting there, but the other one doesn't come in, or it comes in later, or something changes, and now you have these orphans out there, and now you're left with this process which becomes steady state, because you have this happening all the time, that you're like, oh, I got to go search for orphans, and then I got to clean the orphans out. And then once you clean the orphans out, you got to figure out, okay, well, wait a minute, it should have been associated with this. Now you have this whole process of trying to fix the data, as opposed to getting the process aligned correctly, so when it comes in, the orphan should be the exception. And then you always want to go back to how that orphan got there, and then figure out how to prevent it from happening, rather than introduce a process that's all about cleaning up orphans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Plan versus react.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yep. There have been a couple of things posted on the questions that are kind of related to this, and so there was a comment saying, setting the characteristics of like a weak relationship or cascade delete at the class level. It works for some things and not for others. As an example, it makes sense for memory and processor, but not for monitors, for example, maybe as a hosted component. And just acknowledge that there's a general deficiency in the kind of the granularity of relationship classes, especially the classes that can apply to a lot of different types of parents and children. We don't have that ability to have the fine-grained, the dependency class between this and this is kind of a cascade delete, but between this and this other thing is not. Right now, you have to kind of create different types of relationships. You can create different relationship classes, but that's kind of tedious, and that's it leads to kind of hundreds or thousands of different relationship classes. This is an area that we need to explore, enhancing the CMDB, allowing you to have kind of some characteristics that are more, hey, I've got a general type of relationship, a dependency relationship or a hosted component relationship, but if it's between these two things, it's cascade delete. But between these two classes, it's not. And that is just a weakness in the system right now. And that is something that, we don't have everything working exactly as would be desired. That is a nice enhancement for the future.
Yep. So one thing to add here is when we talk about the cascade feature, we have to be really careful when you're dealing with the data, because it does a physical delete. So make sure that whenever you are using this option, be cautious and make sure that the data you're dealing is when the parent CI has been soft deleted and you are removing that CI physically, then it should kick in. Otherwise, you may lose some data. So be cautious about it.
Just use it when you mean it. Otherwise, be careful.
Yep.
Okay, so Greg, pick another question.
Okay, give me 1 second. I just want to pick a good one here.
Do we have anybody that's queued up in the live line? Just to be sure we haven't forgot about those.
Kellyanne?
We don't, but I would like to remind everyone that it is *1 if you have a phone question.
And just while Greg's finding a good question from the panel, is we know it's an hour. We're at an hour into things. At least a number of us are okay with continuing, so we're going to go ahead and continue the call for another 15 minutes or so, because we think that there's some good questions being asked and some good information going out. So if you need to drop off, thank you for joining. Otherwise, we're going to keep going for a little bit.
And I would also add, to stall a little bit more for Greg to find those key questions to queue to the top. One of the things that's, as Greg pointed out in the beginning, this is kind of the first time we're exploring this area of interaction and this channel of discussion and dialogue. As a participant in this, one of the things we would ask you is to let us know how this worked. Let us know if you're interested in us doing this again. Let us know what didn't work. It is our intent to ensure that we have a forum by which folks can come in and ask these kind of questions, and we can structure things to get you the information and not just be dependent upon, the documentation, which we'll of course invest in and do better at. But we feel some of these dialogues go a long ways for us to get to the heart of questions, as opposed to just getting a one-off question and then we don't flush things out as we're able to do here. So let us know if this is working. Let us know if you would want to continue or do more of these as a part of your feedback. Or if this was a complete waste of time and we can all be off doing other things. Either feedback is great. We just need to know one way or another how this is working for you guys.
Well, at least 58 of them hung in with us, Darius.
Or they put us on mute and started working on the email. I'm not sure which. That's why I'm asking.
So I have one question that I just want to raise up. The question is, what are the best practices with regards to preventing orphan, hang on, pop-up window came in the way, sorry, orphan child CI records from existing in the CMDB if the parent CI gets marked as deleted and gets purged? That leaves the child CI still in the CMDB.
Yeah, we just covered that, essentially, Greg.
So, Greg, we just covered that part here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, see, I gave you a good question. You answered it already.
All right. So while you're looking for another one, there was a question about, hey, if I mark as delete a CI, what about the relationships? Do they get rebuilt? Just be aware, a relationship in the BMC Atrium CMDB is a real live object. It's got its own set of attributes. That includes mark as deleted. So the relationships don't get deleted. The relationships get marked as deleted, just like the CIs do. So if the CI comes back, the relationship comes back. And so the idea is these things are tied together. So it's still the mark as deleted flag, even on relationships. So, Greg, we've got another one?
Yeah, I'll give you another answered, already answered one. It's a more of an open-ended question, and it's so it may be something we may need to take offline. But we've just began researching the multi-tenancy options regarding ADDM and CMDB. Can you give a brief overview of this process if I'm wanting to implement this using multiple ADDM scanners, consolidators, and one CMDB?
Okay. Go ahead, Darius.
I actually was about to jump in, but I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding the introduction of two terms here that are two different concepts, at least in my mind. Let me play it back.
Darius, Darius, one second. Michael, if you're still on, possibly you can signal *1, join the open line, and then we can maybe have a little bit more detail for the panelists.
Right.
Yeah, Darius, what I think the topic is how does multi-tenancy work with new CMDB? How do we have it configured? And if I have ADM loading from multiple tenants, how can I make it work?
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so, well, were you okay? So the way this is almost something that ties in very because the reason why I'm struggling with this a little bit is maybe it's because I'm reading too much into this, because having separate data sets almost makes this, at least in how I'm looking at it, pretty straightforward, because I'm assuming that if you are tying an ADDM data set to a certain tenant that is a part of that discovery of that environment that is specific to that tenant, then passing information in to that data set, which then gets communicated into the right values inside of the CMDB, allows you to establish that tenant for that data source. And if I have another tenant, or I have an ADDM that's a completely isolated other tenant, it goes into its own data set. The place where it would get confusing, unless the person is approaching this way, which is why they're asking, is if you took all these things and you're trying to put them into the same data set. And I would take and say, partition the data sets, not just because it's ADDM data set, give each tenant its own data set per ADDM instance, and have that flow in with the tenant embedded as a part of the data that comes in. And CMDB is staged to handle tenancy as long as you give it the right data and the right fields to manage it. So I was struggling if in fact I'm missing something in what they're asking.
I think a little bit of it is also, the CMDB has multi-tenancy built in. There's a field 112, which is a company. There's also a field, another field for additional right security and things. So there are multi-tenancy fields, a 60,000 something or other field, 60,009 something. But the idea is the CMDB allows you to have tenancy. So you put the groups on the multi-tenancy field just like you would do any form in the action request system.
Right.
And then using Darius's model, what you would do is have the ADDM load from each tenant comes into its own data set, okay? And then by doing that, ADDM doesn't need to know anything about the tenancy. You simply have normalization. You set normalization jobs that say, hey, for data in data set Fred, you put the company name Fred in the company field. For the ones that come into ADDM Sally, put Sally in it. And so what you can do is you can actually use the CMDB's capability, like the normalization engine, to populate those roll-up security fields.
Right.
And so all the data that gets loaded, the source doesn't need to know about it. You just populate them in different data sets. That allows you, hey, a tenant goes away, you get rid of that data set, you get rid of the data associated with them. It's nice and clean. And you bring it in, you reconcile it in case there's shared data between the multiple tenants, and you merge into production. And so you take advantage of the fact that it's built on the AIR system, so it has the full multi-tenancy capability there. There's several multi-tenancy fields already defined on the CMDB record on BMC base element, so it's for every class. And then you load the data to the different data sets, and you allow normalization to populate those roll-up security fields and go ahead and go forward to the system.
And the key is, again, if we get back to where the confusion might have been without any guidance or prior to this, yes, if somebody was saying, oh, we were talking about give each discovery source its own data set, and therefore the interpretation was, oh, I'm just using ADDM in different places, so I'm going to pump all the different instances into the one ADDM data set. No, let's take it back and take true stock of what we mean by source. It's not just necessarily the mechanism that is populating the data set, it's actually the source of where the information is coming from. So although ADDM is used in the Fred tenant, and it's also being used as a mechanism or as a discovery mechanism in the Sally tenant, the sources are different. So therefore the concept of source means you create a data set for each source. And once you've done that, as Doug was describing, you can leverage normalization to just, it's for that data set, it is owned by that source. So give it the tenant that's appropriate. And when that flows into the CMDB, by putting it into the field, it's built in. CMDB is running on the AR platform, and the partitioning and the tenancy is inherent once you establish the proper values in the right fields.
Right. And then if you take that further, I just want to really emphasize this further, that things like the, multiple discovery sources are great. Don't constrain, I need to keep those as small as possible. Have as many as you need. And that includes for manual discovery. A lot of people think, I need one data set that I type all manual changes in. No, you don't. I would have multiple manual discovery sets. Have one that is just a service modeling data set. And the only people that work in that data set are people doing service modeling. And the reconciliation rules only obey the service modeling data from that data set as the winner. Any data that's not service modeling data is not the winner from that data set. I have another one that's the inventory data set. I have another one that's manual corrections of automated discovered data. I have another one that's whatever it happens to be. And I control who writes to which data set based upon what their purpose in life is. Why are they writing? What is the purpose of that updates and discovery? And then I can keep I can make my normalization rules react to what data set it is. I can make my reconciliation have different priorities based upon what the purpose of a data set is. And so many, many, many discovery data sets is not a problem. It's actually a good idea. Have them very focused on a particular purpose from a particular source.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So there was a question about the immediacy of data. Hey, I've got attributes that show up immediately, like ASC attributes. The changes are there immediately, whereas changes to other data that's more configuration data, because it goes through reconciliation, may not be as immediate. How do I deal with that? Well, the data is different. I mean, one set is configuration data, one set is lifecycle data. And also be aware that you're in control of how often reconciliation runs. You can even set reconciliation up to be continuous. And you can have it, and because each job is the rate at which it runs, you can have different jobs that run at different paces. So, for example, you can have an automated source that comes in like from ADDM, hey, I'm going to make sure I reconcile that on a daily basis or whatever I happen to be, every 6 hours or daily or whatever. If it's a manual entry data set, like the asset management, maybe you set up the job to say, hey, whenever I make a change to the asset management discovery data set, I'm going to have continuous reconciliation going on, so that whenever I make a change there, it is near real-time reconciled into production. And so you get to control that. BMC, in fact, uses continuous reconciliation as the only reconciliation model it uses. For our IT department, they use continuous reconciliation for all updates that show up in any discovery data set. You can choose to do that. You can choose to, mix and match. But the idea is, if it is important that you want those manual changes to show up more real time, just set up continuous reconciliation for those areas, and that data will show up near real time. And that can solve the timing problem. So you're in control of the timing. And it's how much, again, make sure your reconciliation is running, you've given it enough power, you've run on private queues, maybe even a dedicated server and server group, so there's enough power to keep up with that load. But really, the load, you're not making tens of millions of changes an hour, you're making dozens to hundreds. And so the keeping up is really not that big of a challenge.
So the one thing I would offer here is I would go back, because what we want to do, here's the thing. Doug, myself, and Manish could talk about this all day. I mean, we really could. I mean, we're that passionate about making sure that the right information is out there. I'm going to take a cue from this, unless somebody tests this to not be true. If there's a question that's a live question in the queue, then we will take that call. If there's not a live question in the queue, because I'm starting to be sensitive to the counts and the people are starting to drop off, what we would do is say, hey, let's wrap up with this one, and we would look forward to doing another one based upon your feedback. So if there's a live question, we'll take it. And if there's not, then we'll do a wrap-up, and we'll look for your feedback, and anything that you guys sent as questions, we'll do the same process we did before. We'll take them offline, we'll take a look at them, and maybe they act as the seeding for another session. So I would ask, is there anything else in the queue?
We do have a couple of other questions. We'll take our first call. Do you want to take them?
No. I already said I would, so I can't lie now.
All right. Caller, please go ahead.
I'm good.
You're good. Okay. We answered it. Excellent.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, next. And we'll take our next caller. Please go ahead.
Hi, I just want to confirm when you're talking about the relationships when they're marked for delete, when I run my purge, when I only run purge when I'm doing cleanup of stuff, that those relationships are getting purged too. Is that correct?
You specify which classes you're purging, and you just make sure you specify the relationship classes too.
Okay. Cool.
But yes, they would be purged if you have it set up so that you're saying, hey, I'm purging these classes. All the, BMC base element, which takes out all its children, and BMC base relationship, which takes out all its children. And I want them to be considered. Yes, it would purge those two.
Okay. And you guys are going to send out to those of us that attended the sample job for the AI thing that was going to make me the most wonderful person at my job because of the SCCM?
No. I heard queen. We are targeting queen.
I am the queen.
Okay, there you go.
I will be. They will be. I will be They will think I am the most wonderful queen that they ever had at my company when I come back and tell them that we can fix this without having to spend $1 zillion.
Hold it.
You left that qualifier off.
Yeah, I want to spend the money on something else.
Oh, I see. So there's two parts. Go ahead. Sorry, Doug.
Post it with the posting, we're not going to send an email directly to you. We're going to post it with the posting of this whole Q&A and stuff up in the community.
And where does that get posted? Because I'm not aware of where that is.
Greg?
Yeah, so basically in communities where this webinar was advertised, there will be a posting of this. If you want to send me a private message, I'll go ahead and let you know when this is posted and make sure you have the correct link.
Excellent. Thank you.
And who is this talking?
What's that?
BMC has a very hidden email strategy. You'll never figure it out. First name _ last name at bmc.com.
Cool.
Right. Now, who is this talking?
This is
because you have to figure out how to spell Kioi.
This is Sue Katie. This is Sue Katie. I'm with BAE Systems. I think I've met some of you guys at a meeting.
Okay.
Perfect. I'll find you and pop you an email. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Other questions?
We do have one other question, caller. Please go ahead.
I'm good.
Oh, cool.
There you go.
All
There you
right.
See, I have these people ask already answered questions. Isn't that great, guys?
There you go.
Okay, Greg, your turn again.
So yeah, so that, I mean, that's going to be our cue. I mean, if there's questions that come up, you know, last call to the star one. We do this as that comes in, but we would go ahead and wrap up here if there aren't others, and we will take all the questions that came in the queue. We'll audit them and leverage Greg to make sure this gets posted to the right area. And like I said, we encourage you to give us feedback, good or bad. We're always looking for that direct, real-time understanding as whether this is getting you the information that you need. So with that, Greg, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Darius, Doug, and Manish. I really appreciate your time. And as they said, the feedback, anything that you have, if a different type of forum would work better or something else that you have in mind, you know, since this is our first one, we want to, you know, do something that works and is good for all of us to get this information out to you. So with that, I want to thank you again for joining and spending the extra time with us. And
Now and forever, we bring IT to life.